If you're a regular listener to my show, you might have noticed something different. It's still about human journeys, positivity and possibility. Chatter That Matters still celebrates those who've overcome circumstances to chase their dreams, and when they do, change their world and often ours for the better. So what's the difference? I want more life lessons. I think our world is growing in uncertainty and insecurity, in complexity and comprehension. And I want to make sure that wherever I can, I take full advantage of the guests and draw out those insights and ideas that will leave me with things that I'm going to think about, feel about, and even act upon. And not just for today, but for decades to come, as most of us will live far longer than we ever thought possible. Well, what if I told you that 30 minutes from now, you'll take away some ideas that you, in fact, will carry for the rest of your life?
I think the phrase growing old is really one-dimensional. It basically suggests that all we have is the passage of time and the deterioration of our body. But I actually think something is much more at play here, much more interesting. The idea of what's happening in midlife is we are actually in the process of turning into something else.
I'm that confident in my guest today, Chip Conley. He's a visionary entrepreneur, best-selling author, and the founder of Joie de Vivre Hospitality, which became the second largest boutique hotel company in the States. And after selling the company, Chip became the mentor or Yoda at Airbnb, helping guide its young leadership through such rapid growth and innovation.
What percentage of your adult life is still ahead of you? Society's outdated model of the three-stage life, you learn, then you earn, then you retire, suggests that the game of life is a one-tank journey.
But Chip is also the founder of the Modern Elder Academy, the world's first midlife wisdom school, where he focuses on helping people navigate life's transitions with purpose and with wisdom.
So more and more of us are actually feeling like we're running on fumes, and we need a midlife pit stop.
Hi, it's Tony Chapman. Thank you for listening to Chatter That Matters, presented by RBC. If you can, please subscribe to the podcast. And ratings and reviews, well, they're always welcome and they're always appreciated. Chip Conley, welcome to Chatter That Matters.
Thank you, Tony. It's good to be here.
I love this label that either your school kids gave you or it just sort of stuck with you, the curious white boy growing up in Southern California, but not the 90210 Hollywood that we think of. You're talking about this predominantly non-white inner city school.
I went to school in the hood. Snoop Dogg, who's 10 years younger than me, went to the same high school, but so did Cameron Diaz. So it was a very unusual high school in that it was a mixed race high school, but predominantly non-white.
And where did you get the label curious white boy?
I asked questions a lot. I was very culturally curious. So I think we had 26 different languages. So there are a lot of different cultures there. And I was fascinated by Tagalog, the Filipino language, or wanted to learn more about one of my classmates who is from Syria.
How do you think that is a tactic or strategy for people to say, if you just stopped and listen with some generosity about who that other person is, it's the easiest way to erase sort of the barriers and biases that we're different people instead of being part of a human race?
Prejudging people, which is, another way of saying prejudice, is easier, because it doesn't require curiosity or inquiry or empathy. It does take time, energy, and a little bit of heart to be open to getting to know people, both based upon their cultural history that is unique and different than yours, but also for who they are unrelated to their cultural history.
It just strikes me, everything I read about you and stuff is this fascination of sort of peeling back and trying to understand sort of the head, heart, and hands of the human race. Stanford, I'm hearing you're an MBA student, so you're after your undergraduate degree, and playing water polo. And I'm curious, sort of the field of play, which they call the water polo arena. What did you take away from there? And equally, what did you take away from your MBA?
I'd say what I learned from water polo, which is a pretty grueling sport, there's a lot of stuff that goes on underwater that referees can't see. It might mean that you're trying to get things done underneath, the surface of things. Be careful about what happens in business when there's not ethics and a culture, they're helping to define how people are playing. And then in business school, I realized within a few months, like I deserved to be there just like everybody else. I was on average 3 or 4 years younger than the average person there, but I had gained a lot of experience. I had taken a year off from college and worked as an undergrad. I don't judge someone's lack of wisdom based upon their experience. If they have a lack of wisdom, they just have a lack of wisdom. One thing I learned from my water polo days, I was the slowest person on the team. I had to be that much smarter and resilient. So the key thing for me is I had to be careful about don't get too close to the goal, because if you're too close to one goal, then you're going to have to swim all the way further. So I was really good at sort of like not fully committing to go the full length of the pool because I'd have to swim more.
For me, I am someone who somehow channels things through me. And I'm not a channel of spirits or anything like that, but I'm a channel of ideas. I will then come up with a new idea and a passion and a purpose, and I become one-dimensional. And all of a sudden I go from the conduit to the canduit, and I'm the canduit hero.
I want to get at 26 years old. You've found Joie de Vivre Hospitality. First of all, the name, and it's a French name to me. Is that like spirit of youth? Somebody had got lost in a Balzac novel, or was that really the sense of joy of life? Is how you were at 26, and frankly, how you probably are today?
We should have been headquartered in Montreal. I mean, come on.
I know.
But what I really loved was some of the phraseology of French, and Joie de Vivre didn't really have a comparable English language. You say joy of life, but people don't say like, oh, that person has such a joy of life. They'd say like, that person has a joie de vivre. And when you say joie de vivre, it just sounds a little bit more sexy and a little bit more pretty and beautiful. And yeah, I really believe that the mission of our company, which was to create joy for our employees and our customers, could also be the name of our company. And there are very few companies out there in the world whose mission statement is also the name of the company. And I liked that.
Did it change the way you looked and hired people? Because an organization that's growing as quick as yours, it's lovely when you have somebody, and often by accident, that comes in and just radiates joy, but their resume might not tick off everything you're looking for. Did you find the opposite, that you were more interested in joy and then you could teach people the attributes and competencies of the job?
In some ways, you're setting yourself up for failure, because if you're building an expectation that everybody in the company is going to feel a sense of joy in what they do, that's not going to be how you feel every day. I mean, it just doesn't work that way. But it was aspirational in a way that really elevated our culture. We had even had a joy party at our 20th anniversary. We had opened this hotel called the Hotel Vitale in San Francisco, which became the most successful upscale hotel in town. So we threw a party to celebrate the name Joy. And we invited 10,000 women around the state of California who had the name Joy based upon the U.S. Postal Service. And the first 300 who said yes got to come for free. And the first 50 who said yes got a free hotel room in this luxury hotel. And to have 300 women and girls with the name Joy all celebrating with tears of joy together was a beautiful experience. One of my favorite things I ever did as a business leader.
I'm always interested from entrepreneurs, because just listening to you and talking to you right now, I could see how you're engaging, you're persuading, you lead with your heart. But as you start growing an organization, which means you have to sort of backfill who you are, you can't be everywhere anymore. How did you keep that culture going? What advice can you give to people to say, if you really want to own something, in your case, joy, how do you make sure that something as intangible as that, how do you make sure that cascades down as you grow?
So we came to the conclusion that we needed to democratize culture in a hospitality company. And so we created something called the cultural ambassadors. And each one of our hotels, restaurants, and spas had a cultural ambassador. Their job was to come up with, how do we make the culture of joy real in our particular business, recognize each other for what we are doing well, and how do we think about how our hotel or restaurant or spa can be philanthropically creating joy in the community. What it did is it allowed the culture of joy to spread throughout all of our properties throughout the state of California, because it wasn't just like the head of HR for the company, sending out a memo.
If you talk to some of the employees in the past that had that title. I'm going to just go on a limb. They might say that was the best part of my job.
There's right around the corner from me, there's a bathroom and there's a photo of a guy named William Ortiz who went to prison between 18 and 20 or 21, came out, couldn't get a job. We gave him a job. He grew in the company, became a manager, and ultimately a cultural ambassador for his hotel. Ultimately, he started his own entrepreneurship business, and then he ended up in the White House. I mean, cultural ambassadors were really the people who everybody knew had the best job, but you had to be elected by your fellow employees.
How easy was it for you to let go of Joy in terms of how my identity's attached to it and put it out to the organization and let individuals take it on and almost as a prison, reflect it in terms of how they wanted to see it or feel it versus maybe what you did?
At some point, I realized there was no other way. I had my perspective on what Joie de Vivre meant and what joy was, but the bartenders at a bar that we owned, they're going to have a different perspective on it. We did have to have some parameters. We did have to, every year when there was a new set of cultural ambassadors, do a training, and we would have them go for a weekend, free weekend away. That was really a nice perk for them. But we helped train them to help them to understand what happens in terms of the culture. The culture of housekeepers in your hotel is very different than the culture of the night auditors who are doing the accounting in the middle of the night. How do you bring them together? I think we did a pretty good job of training people. And part of the reason that I know this worked was because our guests, our employee satisfaction scores, in terms of just how happy they were with their work, was off the charts.
Ultimately, you sold this platform to somebody else. How hard was it for you to let it go? Or was it time that it sort of run its course in terms of what Chip Conley wanted to do with it?
To be honest with you, I thought I'd be doing it till age 80. And at 47, I realized I didn't want to do it anymore. But I needed to, because, as the CEO of a company, you're the chief emotions officer. And during the dot-com bust in 9/11, I was a bit of a gladiator, and I was there and I loved it. But during the Great Recession, I didn't want to be doing it anymore. And I had a flatline experience. So I died because of an allergic reaction to an antibiotic. And it was like sort of a wake-up call for me, a hotelier's wake-up call, a little divine intervention to say, like, you don't have to keep living your life this way.
And talk to me about the flatlining experience, because I read about it in one of the articles. And obviously when it was happening, it's a sledgehammer that's hitting you, but almost the way you reflect on it now is one of the most important things that you experienced.
I had an allergic reaction to an antibiotic when I was on stage after giving a speech. Fortunately, I was sitting down signing books, and I went unconscious in my chair. I slumped, and then they put me on the ground, and paramedics showed up, and then I went flatline. First time of 9 times I did in 90 minutes. When you go into sort of that state of being in which everything's slow motion and it's beautiful and you don't feel any fear, there's a real sense that, why am I feeling so miserable on earth when I'm in this bardo zone, this limbo zone, feeling so good? And, it felt like I was out for hours, but I was literally out for maybe 15 seconds each time. Life is meant to be joyful. To not be feeling very joyful when you're the CEO of a company called Joie de Vivre is a strange irony. It was an irony that I needed to correct. And in this case, I couldn't correct it by feeling better. I needed to correct it by selling the company and moving on to something else. As
you look back, how did it change you from a spirituality point of view? How did it change you from a perspective point of view? Because I have to imagine that, whatever divine intervention it was, you had 9 times you experienced that. I call it divine intervention. And so I say that without necessarily having a strong religious belief, but having a very deep spiritual belief that sometimes things happen that maybe there was a reason it happened. But when you're in that moment, you're going to feel things. And I think I'd been running away from a lot of my emotions. And so I had to learn how to process my emotions. I ultimately wrote a book after I'd sold the company, called Emotional Equations, which became a New York Times bestseller. It was based upon feeling like I was a bit of an idiot when it came to my emotions during that time. When you go to the other side and you know that at any moment you could die, it means you're much more demanding about how you're living your life today. You can't put off happiness 10 years. You can't put off gratitude 10 years. You can't put off
recognition and thank yous 10 years. You got to do it now. David Brooks famously has said, in a column in the New York Times, the first half of your life, you're building your resume. The second half of your life, you're building your eulogy. And I totally believe that.
There's so much more when we come back. Chip's battling cancer and talks about how his parents are reacting to it. He opens up about the Modern Elder Academy, the only school of its kind in the world, and how through joy and purpose and pursuit, you can add years to your life, and so much more. And of course, my 3 takeaways. But first, I want to talk to you about what RBC Wealth is doing. They've partnered with the MIT Age Lab, the National Institute on Aging, Women's Brain Health Initiative, Elder Caring, and the Women's Age Lab. Why? Because RBC Wealth believes that by integrating the thinking of leading healthcare organizations, they can ensure that their clients are well positioned for both financial success and long-term personal health. Healthcare, well, that matters to you, to me, and to RBC.
What if we rethought midlife such that it's not a crisis? It's a chrysalis, the midlife chrysalis. What if we thought of midlife as the dawning of a new age, an age where much of what we accumulated dissolves, just as we're ready to transform, spread our wings, and pollinate our wisdom to the world in our 50s and beyond?
My guest today is Chip Conley. Yes, he's a successful entrepreneur and was instrumental in scaling Airbnb. But what I think he'll be known for, more than anything, is his work with the Modern Elder Academy, a school that focuses on midlife learning and helping people repurpose their lives and make sure that the next part of their life is as magical as it can be. I'm not asking you to put yourself on a pedestal, but I'm going to do it for a moment, because when I first heard of you and then started listening to your TED Talks and reading some of your interviews, you strike me as a modern day prophet.
The experience opened up a channel for me to listen and hear the calling a little bit more clearly. I would definitely never call myself a modern day prophet, but I would call myself an awakener. I used to call myself a teacher, but I actually think part of what I do is I help to awaken myself and others. I love the idea that if you're fortunate enough to have a calling knock on your door, you pick up the phone. And, if it's ringing, mixed more metaphor there. If it's ringing, the phone is ringing, you pick up the phone, and then you find out that you have a calling, and you could try to neglect it, but I have not neglected it. And so my 50s were an amazing decade working with Airbnb as their modern elder and creating the Modern Elder Academy and writing some more books and really getting curious about wisdom. I believe that wisdom is making a comeback after 2,000 years.
Let's talk about Airbnb. I loved your TED Talk. You mentioned, being called the modern day elder. We're going to get into the academy in a moment, but you go from having your hand on the rudder, this is my ship, this is where I'm going to go and I can do this and that, to being their Yoda.
Well, Richard Rohr, famous Christian mystic who is on our faculty at MEA, talks about the fact that the first half of your life, maybe up to around age 50, your primary operating system is your ego. And we overuse it, but it also serves us well in terms of individuating us, propelling us forward, helping us to understand who we think we are. And then the second half of our life, our primary operating system moves to our soul, but nobody gave you any operating instructions. I believe that part of my role by going to Airbnb was learning that my identity and role were changing. I was no longer the sage on the stage, the CEO, but I was the guide on the side. I was the CEO whisperer. My job ultimately became, how do I help Brian Chesky, a guy who has no business background at all? How do I help him to become the best leader possible so that he can help take this company to the highest levels and he can continue to operate the business? And for almost 4 years now, he has been a public company CEO, the only Fortune 500 CEO who does not have a business background and comes from the creative world as a designer. I'm proud of that. I feel like he's 21 years younger than me. He's like my son. That was a huge shift I had to make, and my ego had to get right-sized to realize, Chip, your photo is not going to be on the front cover of Forbes magazine. Brian's will be, and Brian's deserved to be.
You take it one step further. Some of your books, Wisdom at Work, the concept of the modern elder, and then you form the Modern Elder Academy. And I really want you to unpack that because, as I said to Jill, there's so few people that will get to go there. But it seems like the people who go there have their own emotional lining experience versus flatlining. They come out of it very different.
You know, I was writing this book, Wisdom at Work, The Making of a Modern Elder, based upon my Airbnb experience. And I was doing that in southern Baja in Mexico, about an hour north of Cabo San Lucas on the Pacific Ocean, where I had a home. And I went for a run on the beach one day and I had a Baja aha. I had an epiphany. And the epiphany was, why don't we have midlife wisdom schools? We don't have schools, tools, rites of passage, or rituals for people in the middle of their life to consciously curate the second half of their life. And that's really how it came about. The term modern elder, the reason they called me that at Airbnb is they said, you're as curious as you are wise. And it's like the alchemy of curiosity and wisdom. That's what I want to be when I grow up. So creating MEA, the Modern Elder Academy, was meant to create a place where we can mint modern elders, where we can help people, often in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, go out and learn how to mine their wisdom and cultivate their purpose and navigate their transitions and reframe their relationship with aging. Long story short is we've had 5,500 graduates now from 50 countries. Average age is 54. About half of the people are on some level of financial aid. So it is not exclusive to just people who have money. And we also have online programs that are very affordable. So what we've tried to do is make it accessible. And we have a campus in Baja, but we also have a campus in Santa Fe, New Mexico with 2,600 acres of regenerative horse ranch. It's become a bit of a movement. We have 58 regional chapters around the world.
And I love the way you framed it. Instead of being a midlife crisis, it's a midlife chrysalis.
So the chrysalis is the in-between stage between caterpillar and butterfly. It's dark and gooey and solitary, but it's where the transformation happens. So when I started doing my research on midlife and seeing, well, it's interesting, there's this thing called the U-curve of happiness, and people get happier after 50. 45 to 50 tends to be the low point of adult satisfaction. And starting at age 50 and beyond, people get happier and happier. Well, that suggests that maybe after going through the crisis/chrysalis, you become a butterfly. Similarly, Becca Levy at Yale University has shown that when people shift their mindset on aging from a negative to a positive, they gain 7.5 years of additional life. Why aren't we talking more about this? How are we helping people shift their mindset on aging? I do believe that midlife wisdom schools, which is what we are pioneering in this category, are something that's needed in the future. Because if we're living longer and people are probably going to stay in the workplace longer by choice or necessity, we got to help people to figure out what they're going to do with their life. If you're 54 years old, which is, again, the average age of the people who come to MEA, and you're going to live till 90, you're exactly halfway between 18 and 90. So you're sort of halfway through your adulthood.
I want to come back a little bit to your family because age 50, you learn Spanish, you take up surfing. And in an interview I read, you also sort of credited it because your dad decided he wasn't going to go get old the way Hollywood defines what old age is.
My dad, at age 60, decided he wanted to learn to scuba dive. He did 25 or 2,600 dives over the next 20 years. My dad's very much an adventurous sort. My mom is the opposite. I've taken more after my dad than my mom. Yeah, and I think that one of the most important things we need to learn as we get older is that curiosity and an openness to new experiences are positively correlated with living a longer, healthier, happier life.
What did you take away from your mom?
My mom is very precise. She gets stuff done, incredibly reliable. She cares a lot about what other people think about her, which in a small dose is a good thing. In many ways, she helped to humanize me a little bit more.
And how do they feel about the son of theirs having stage 3 cancer? How are they dealing with that?
They're fearful for me because they don't want me to die before they die. They are deeply woven into my life in a good way.
And you talk a lot about the importance of emotional intelligence. Those are one of those phrases that sort of just suddenly roared through the vernacular of business. What do you mean by emotional intelligence, and why would it matter to the people listening to this podcast?
being able to understand your own emotions as well as others is pretty much what emotional intelligence is about. Being able to both experience it and then be articulate about it. So when someone's not very emotionally intelligent, they're sort of lacking in some of their humanity or their capacity for humanity. We do improve our emotional intelligence as we get older. Our IQ doesn't grow, but our EQ does on average. At my funeral, I want people to be able to come up and say, hey, this is the impact that Chip had on me. As Maya Angelou said, we may not remember what a person says or does, but we do certainly remember the way that person made me feel. That, to me, is the ultimate form of what emotional intelligence can do for us.
And you're taking this modern elder platform to new communities like Santa Fe, New Mexico. And you're choosing places where it's more than just having the impact on the individuals, even though they're there and that you're helping subsidize, but also have an impact on the community.
It's really important. I mean, we don't want to be this walled off place, and I've never wanted that for any of my businesses, whether it was Joie de Vivre with my boutique hotels or Airbnb or with MEA. So we have a whole collection of regenerative principles about how we give back to the community. It helps the business. It's good for us. Our team feels great about it. But when the community feels great about us, there's less friction. There's more people wanting us to succeed.
Last two questions. One of them really dealing with this sort of 70% of the content's negative. AI is going to continue to increase the frequency of it because that's what holds eyeballs. That's how social media monetizes. How do you counter that? How do people like you who are really, as you said, well, that's pretty common sense. If we just did that, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, the simplicity of being a human being versus somebody locked in a like-minded castle liking like-minded content. How do you counter that? Because there's a tsunami coming at us of negativity. You can expand as fast as you can, but you're going to be creating, 5,200 graduates against 10,000 messages a day.
There's a guy named Dacher Keltner, UC Berkeley professor, started at the Greater Good Science Center. He's on our faculty at MEA. He wrote a book last year that called Awe, and it documented the 8 most common pathways globally for people to feel awe. And number one on the list was a surprise. It was moral beauty. And when you experience kindness and compassion and resilience and grit and equanimity, and you see it in real life, and then you desire to actually reciprocate that, that is the ultimate form of, in my opinion, being a good human. I'm not powerful enough to go out there and change that tsunami you're talking about. But what I can do is create some wedges for that tsunami, such that in that wedge, there's this beautiful little spot where you get some moral beauty. And I can also make sure everybody who comes to MEA or listens to our online fireside chats for free knows that our emotions are contagious. So if you want to spread fear, be fear. If you want to spread joy, be joy. Because guess what? That's how we, as humans, take on other people's emotions.
And if you did it all again with, your undergraduate degree, your MBA, entrepreneurship, Airbnb and stuff, any thoughts would it might have been a completely different path?
I think if I could do it all again, I probably would have left the boutique hotel business earlier. Well, first of all, I had an identity that I was so enamored with. Milking that and just feel like, that's my identity. That's my ego. That's like who I am. I wish I hadn't gotten so obsessed about that, because I would have seen that the thing that actually led me to creating Joie de Vivre, which is creativity and freedom, was something I lost after about 10 or 12 years in the company. What would have been like if in my 40s, I had had the whole decade of my 40s to maybe explore my writing career more, spend more time traveling, being a little more of a philosopher than an operator.
I always end my shows with my 3 takeaways, and I'm struggling because there's so many beautiful parts of you. I think the word that roared, the G chord of this whole song is curiosity, from that kid in elementary school that was, curious about all these different cultures, to your undergraduate degree, to just this naming a boutique hotel in California with a French name. Every branding expert in the world say nobody will ever spell it. In those days, it was probably the Yellow Pages. curiosity's always been part of it. And it's really interesting how it changed from who I am and why I matter to who you are and why you matter. I think this whole lesson on emotional intelligence in our brain, and sort of driven by ego at the beginning and now looking for enlightenment, Maslow called it self-actualization. If you have the luxury to have that time and invest that time and meditate and breathe and realize there's a lot around the world that's beautiful, I think is something wonderful as well. And, you used the word awakening and I used the word profit. I think they're one and the same. I think you are awakening individuals to positivity and possibility and joy, and maybe profit's too extreme of a brand for you, but I hope you keep spreading your this magic and live a very long life, outlive your parents, and by the time there's a eulogy about you, nobody will remember who you were. So, because it's, but up until then, I think it's just been wonderful to talk with you, Chip.
I won't even remember who I am. Ram Dass says, becoming nobody. That's what our job is to learn how to become nobody. But thank you so much, Tony. Really appreciate it. Appreciate the work you're doing in the world as well.
Once again, a special thanks to RBC for supporting Chatter That Matters. It's Tony Chapman. Thanks for listening, and let's chat soon.